Thank you for joining us this evening. And thank you for staying with us. We had to delay the program start a little bit this evening because of the speech by the President of Nigeria, President Buhari, following the issues that occurred over the last few days. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. And Prof, thank you once again for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Um, Prof, this week has been a very interesting one because since we started this show, we've taken questions regarding different international issues, and we've had so many questions coming from different angles. But this week specifically, we've had so many questions regarding the protests in Nigeria, the issues that have happened there, and this evening with the response of the president to the issues. Prof, what is your take on all that has happened over the last 3, 4 days, and even from the beginning of the protests?
Well, I don't think that the past 48 hours have been a happy one for any Nigerian and for any African for that matter. I was listening to an African journalist who resides in the United States. And after the event at the Lekki toll, she spoke with so much anguish in her voice, an anguish that reflects the anguish in her soul, that you would have thought she was a Nigerian. But she made it very clear that to all of them, to all the Africans in the diaspora, whatever happens in Nigeria, they also are judged by it. And I felt her anguish because it reflected my own anguish as to what has happened in this country that I once represented as a foreign minister. Now, issues have been raised with me as regards my being quiet last week when the issue of demonstrations was raised. And obviously, you've been bombarded by these same questions. So let's start at the beginning. Twice on this program, we had discussed the issue of the youth participating in the political process. And my position has been critical of the youth who have never contested for councillorship, local government chairman, House of Representatives, senator, or even governor contesting for the presidency as their first incursion into politics. And my own advice on both occasions was that they should start from the grassroots movement and work their way up. And so I regard the protest movement that has been taking place in the past 15 days or so as being involved with the grassroots movement. On October 1, I appeared on this platform. I appeared on Channels TV. I appeared on Arise TV. I appeared on NTA TV. And I wrote a piece for The Guardian in Nigeria. And unlike other Nigerians who were busy praising Nigeria, don't get me wrong, I didn't say they were praising government. I said they were praising Nigeria to the moon. I was expressing my lamentation that there is an absence of achievement by Nigeria. Nigeria was not a great Nigeria where it ought to be. I never said that achievements could not have been recorded. But 4/10 is not definitely 0/10, but it's also not 8/10. And I identified what I thought needed to be done for Nigeria to be a great Nigeria. So Nigerians, and that includes the government, cannot say they're oblivious of my views as to what will constitute a great Nigeria. And last week, when you raised or you passed on to me, I presume it's a question from one of our viewers as regards the demonstrations going on all over the world. I took on the question, but I didn't mention Nigeria by name in my answer. But then I didn't have to. For anyone listening to me to identify my answers with the protest movement in Nigeria. If you will recall what I said last week, I traced the metamorphosis of grievances to protest movement to revolution and to resurrection of each individual countries that I used to illustrate. I didn't talk about all the nations of the world where revolutions are taking place. If I had done so, I think we will still be on this program without any interruption of 8 days. I used the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the American Revolution, I believe the Arab Spring I used those as illustrations, and I expect anybody listening to me to apply the lessons I was drawing your attention to what was happening in my own country, Nigeria. I even issued an alarm that people should be careful that protest movements don't get hijacked by people with different agenda, different motives, with malicious objectives. And I think even in drawing attention to the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States, I specifically drew attention to how during the day, people with pure hearts demonstrate peacefully, demonstrate with good motives. But that at night, people with malicious motives who want to discredit the purity of the daylight movement, some of them encouraged by government, some of them encouraged by other movements, other groups who don't share their pure motives and who want to derail them and perhaps provoke government into cracking down upon them, stepping under the cover of darkness and perpetrate looting, setting fire, killing of people, and so on. All of those I dealt with. So I didn't shy away from the issue, but I spoke more like a scholar, as more like a diplomat who expect you to put two and two together to get four. That's my style. And that doesn't amount to an abandonment of what I believe in. And everything that I drew attention to happened 48 hours ago, when a military unit, and you don't need to deny it, the videos are there, and yes, they were alarmist and perhaps misleading, but the battalion unit was identified, their commanding officer was identified, his picture was put on the internet as being the unit that opened fire on the protesters. This is after the Lagos State government had imposed a curfew. But the shooting took place before the curfew came into operation. Before then, there have been disturbing videos of anti-protesters armed and beating up the protesters. We are not talking about imagination or imaginary pictures. These are things, yes, videos can be doctored, but you can tell when videos are doctored. You could tell from the jumping pictures and what have you. but these were live streaming of obviously sponsored anti-protesters who now unleashed terror on the streets of Nigeria. And that, whether that's now what provoked, the army had denied that they were involved in the shooting at the Lekki toll gate. That it must have been thugs who had access to army uniforms and had access to guns. I think that narrative is even more condemnatory of the army than simply accepting either that there's a rogue unit or that instructions got misunderstood, and extend condolences to the parents of those who've lost their lives. Please let me say this, and I don't want to be misunderstood at all. You know, Mr. Moderator, at times when you make reference to history, you could be motivated by two opposite motives. You could be making reference to history in order to cast aspersion on what you are talking about, or you could be making reference to history to lift up the spirits of the people you are addressing. General Patton, to me, one of the greatest, if not the greatest generals that America has ever produced. At times when he's addressing his troops on the eve of a major battle, will make reference to disasters that other military units had faced and endured, and point attention to how victorious they then were in subsequent battles that they fought, just to drive home the point that you can overcome disasters in war. So I want to say to our protesters that what happened to them on Tuesday, that the blood they shed, or their blood that was shed on Tuesday night, they should not regard it as the worst thing that ever happened to Nigeria, or the worst thing that has ever happened to people who were seeking change in Nigeria. People of my age, of my generation, remembered the civil insurrection in Western region in the 60s, which has gone now into the Nigerian political lexicon as Operation Wetye. Both innocent people and partisans were burnt alive on the streets of Western region. houses were demolished, houses were burnt in Ibadan, the capital of Western region. And yet, go to Ibadan today, you will not find any evidence of what happened. I was also a participant in the June 12 protest movement when the first set of demonstrators were mowed down at the beginning of the third mainland bridge in hundreds, and in other parts of Nigeria where they faced the army and they were slaughtered. And yet we didn't give up. That's part of what led to NADECO being formed, the National Democratic Coalition. Today now, we have a democracy. All right, you may say, Prof, we don't have a democracy. Fine, let's not argue about that. We have civilian governance. But it took us, with some of us having to flee into exile, almost 5 years. So the reason I'm drawing the attention to this is to say, don't give up. Don't think the worst tragedy that can happen has happened. Don't think Nigeria's never seen this. We have seen it, and we have overcome, and we shall overcome.
Prof, there's a question I want to put to you here, because the youths will say we tried to do it the right way. We tried to make it peaceful. There were videos that we've seen of people who were initially throwing stones, and some of the protesters were saying, "Stop, stop! We cannot be violent in what we were doing," and they were controlling themselves. Now that we are where we are, and they have gone through this challenge, what would you have advised they should have done differently?
There is nothing that they did wrong. They behaved perfectly. Mahatma Gandhi would have been proud of them. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would have been proud of them. Look, I was in the United States as a student in the 60s, and believe me, the amount of bloodshed that I saw on the Selma March and other marches, people said being cracked open. John Lewis, who just died, I think he suffered a brain injury. And the autopsy performed on Dr. Martin Luther King after he was shot, don't forget that, after he was shot, showed that his heart was so enlarged, they thought they were operating on somebody who was in his 60s rather than a young man. That showed the effect on him of all that demonstrations. So it wasn't that he wasn't afraid. Courage does not mean being unafraid. Courage is going ahead in spite of your fears. There's nothing the Nigerian demonstrators did wrong. Nothing. But then it does not mean that they will not be subject, or they will not be subjected to the kinds of things they were subjected to. Not at all.
Prof, the government would have said, and I'll come back to the speech of the president in a minute, but the government would have said, hey, you came with your demands. We met we told you what we were going to do. At that point, maybe you should have called off the protest, because there are stories in some quarters saying that, well, you got what the government gave you, and the speed with which the government responded was unprecedented in such a circumstance, and that should have satisfied the protesters at that stage. What do you say to that?
If you will forgive me, going back to my rambling professorial ways, I will make reference back to history. Martin Luther King started with civil rights. By the time he got killed, he had turned that civil rights movement around to now fighting for social justice in the United States. He had turned the movement around to fighting against war, because the Vietnam War was going on at that time, and he thought the lives of American youth were being wasted in the rice fields of Asia, and that you couldn't go on with an unjust war. So, the anti-SARS movement, unless you are going to define anti-SARS so narrowly that it was not a metaphor for good governance, the SARS was just it was not an end in itself. It represented all that was wrong in Nigeria. And for the protesters to have then just gone home because they scrapped SARS. And do you know what they replaced it with? SWAT. Now, you live in London. You know what SWAT is. And when they are called in, it's just another highly specialized instrument of police reaction to violent situations. All over the world, you have them. They are dressed all in black with, hoods on, and with probably the most powerful guns you ever saw in the world. It probably was, again, an ill-advised choice of term to have used for the unit that will replace SWAT. But nevertheless, it was not an end in itself. And so I wasn't surprised that other elements of good governance were then being introduced by these young people. Please bear in mind, these young people are not, politicians who are ancient of days in the game and who could have thought through their program of demands before starting. There was a hook on which they could hang the initial protest movement.
Yeah, Prof. Yes, but again, you refer to history there. Would this have turned into, I've given you one, now I'm asking for another, and another, and another, and would have continued with demand after demand? And I think I just want us to look at both sides in that sense, and then we'll come back to the government side and the government's response, and we'll look at that. But at what point would they have stopped?
If I were advising the government, and this is why presidents and prime ministers and heads of government are often enjoined to appoint advisors who probably have more experience than they do. If I were advising the government, I would have then said, sir, this thing is not going to stop where you think it will stop. What about having done the right thing in accepting their first 5 demands? And you, Mr. President, also know that there is a lot that is wrong with Nigeria. What I will do, the speech that he gave today, I would have given it, I would have advised him to give it maybe 5 days ago. But in that speech, I would have said, having accepted your 5 demands as a sign of my goodwill, I am going to do the following to let you know that I am ahead of you in wanting to make Nigeria a great country. I am going to do X, Y, Z. Put myself ahead now of the protest movement. After all, I don't want to sound like a pastor on this program all the time. But when God asked Solomon, what do you want me to do for you? Solomon asked for wisdom to be able to rule Israel. And then God said, because you didn't ask for wealth or long life, I will add those two to you in addition to the wisdom that you have asked for. So that's the advice I would have given the president. Then that now will empower the interlocutors, the mediators, to go back to these people and say, look, trust him. Even look at what is done. You go back home and let us see. Let us test his goodwill by now seeing. And in the process now of the back and forth between government and the protesters, all these other issues and other items will have come up. After all, if you take the 2014 National Conference report, all the things that need to be done to make Nigeria great are listed in that report. So these protesters did not even need to tell the president what needs to be done to make Nigeria great, to introduce good governance into Nigeria. It's evident to everyone,
Prof,
including those on the street of Ashkelon.
Prof, you've talked about the president's speech there and what you would have advised. Now, the president has now spoken after so many days that people feel like, why did it take this long for you to speak? Now that we've heard him, was there anything in that speech? He talked about not rushing to people, international community not rushing to judgment. He highlighted the government's program. He paid tributes to the officers in there. I'm not sure I had any sort of call out to the protesters who died and to their families. But was that the kind of fatherly response that you would have expected from the president?
Why are you asking me a rhetorical question to which you yourself have the answer, given the way you phrased the question? You recognizing the sacrifices of the policemen who have been attacked and who have died. That's fine. That's fine. I will have put that in the speech myself. But I will also have put there a reference to extending my sympathy to the families of the youth who lost their life. Not only at the Lekki toll gate, but who have been attacked by the anti-protesters. I would have extended my sympathy to the protest movement itself, to the youth who for almost 10 days did not perpetrate one act of violence or destruction. I would have even recognized their sacrifice, sleeping on concrete floor of the roads where they were, day in, day out, and at times under severe rainfall. I would have acknowledged that they are motivated by the best of motives and the love for their country. Yes, I would have put it there, what he said about being aware that there were people who sought and who are seeking to disrupt national life for their own ends rather than the purity of the protest movement of the youth. And that will apply to those who are paying and sponsoring the anti-protest hooligans and thugs who are the ones now burning down Nigeria. And you know, I wouldn't have put in that insinuation of trying to divide the country by saying some youth from a particular part of the country. That was uncalled for. That was cynicism at its worst. I would not have done that. And I would have pointed that to him if I were one of his advisors who saw the draft. No, sir, don't put it there. Nigeria is Nigeria. The protest movement are made up of Nigerian youths. Don't start insinuating this from a particular part of the country. Supposing some people now say, and the thugs are from a particular part of the country. Where is that going to get us? We have fought a civil war in this country. We have had genocide perpetrated before the civil war in this country based on ethnicity. Are we going back to that? Are we?
Prof, there's a question on YouTube here. And this is about the protests was effective. In the short time, they got their demands accepted, which again, unprecedented. But this person is suggesting that the protesters should have demanded for their reps to dialogue with the government for further action. And the question to you is this, Prof. There was no clear leader in the protests, as far as we know. How would you have gotten the people to dialogue with government at that stage? How difficult would it have been to get, these are our representatives, now you go and dialogue on our behalf?
I mean, there were leaders, but the leaders were, hidden behind not just veils, but hidden behind fake curtains of anonymity. Because the youth said, what was wrong with my generation is that the leaders always got compromised and sold out to the rest of us. And that government was very good at bribing leaders. And that leaders were also very good, which is a mark of poverty, mental poverty, psychological poverty, pocket poverty, stomach poverty. So they were always amenable to being bribed and to then compromising. And that's what has led Nigeria to where it is. And so to that extent, they were not going to show their leaders. You yourself must know that it's not possible to have a movement that was carrying out at the same time the same action in several states. That must take enormous coordination. There must be, even in these days of technology, there must be a central committee, or whatever name you are going to call it, who were coordinating, planning, disseminating information, and telling the rest of the movement what to do and what not to do. I
All right.
suspect that there are people who may not know all members of the central committee, but who knew some of the brains behind the movement, and through them were probably communicating with the rest of the members of the central committee. I have my suspicion. I don't have any evidence, but it's just too neat.
Mm.
And as for the anti-protesters, the thugs, they also had the central committee. Why do I say this? Well, why? Who identified that it is prisons which must be broken into all over the states? For what purpose? Some group must be making that kind of determination. Or else, while one movement is doing its own in Lagos, another one will be doing its own in Abuja, another one will be doing its own in Port Harcourt, and not necessarily the same things. But in this particular case, it's the same thing they are doing.
Prof, one of the things that we've seen with this protest is now that we are where we are, what next? I said now that we are where we are with the protests and with what the president has said, with the trauma that the protesters have had to go through. What next now? Where does this all go from here? Does it just end, or do you foresee the protesters coming back on the streets for what they fought for to see that actualized?
I wish I knew. I wish I knew. The protesters, incidentally, never left the streets, in spite of what had happened to them. And I think that this is perhaps the danger which government never envisaged. Because when my generation saw a soldier with a gun, we ran. That night, if you listen to some of the videos, some people were saying, don't run, don't run. Let them kill all of us if they want to. Sit down, don't run. And they sat. And they sat. And the following morning, you saw them again there. When a protest movement or a country gets to a stage where it doesn't fear its soldiers, then government is in trouble. Because that is really the only thing government has: force over civilians. And it must always maintain that, mystery about the armed forces. So I don't know where we go from here. I would have wanted a more upbeat, progressive speech, in the sense of what government is planning to do. You don't live by bread alone. So itemizing salaries, this amount of money for this, that amount of money for that, that's talking about stomach infrastructure. That's a language in Nigerian political parlance now, where governors talk. I mean, it's a polite term for bribery, for sharing bread instead of building roads, for giving bottles of Coca-Cola instead of the improvement of schools and all that kind of thing. I would have dealt with more fundamental issues of governance, that issues that everybody talks about, that government is going to focus on that, and that government is focusing on it. The ruling party has a report produced on restructuring. Everybody, now it's on the mouth of everybody, restructuring. And I don't expect the president to use that term restructuring. But for God's sake, there are terms you can use to signify that fundamental issues of governance you are going to tackle. That's what I would have put in that speech, to give hope. We talked about some of the encyclicals of the popes last week. What was in that speech that will give you hope that the sacrifice you've just made, that the sacrifice is not in vain? Definitely not over salaries and allowances.
One thing we've seen in this protest is the speed at which this was able to attract international media, but quite in a subtle way. When you look at what happened in France, the fact that there was a terror attack, the turnout was again huge turnout. We had leaders from other countries standing side by side with the French president, but then we don't see any such solidarity, if you will, in the Nigerian context from those international leaders. Should the international community have done more in the context of the Nigerian situation?
You talk about solidarity. Solidarity with whom? In the case of France, the government and its people were reading from the same page. And that's why Macron could show up at those demonstrations hand in hand with foreign leaders. In the case of Nigeria, the government is fighting its own people. So, with whom should the international community show solidarity? That's their first dilemma. And of course, they have now shown through their condemnation of what happened at the Lekki toll gate that they are with the people of Nigeria. And the government itself has then been critical of even the little that the international community has done. So there's no way the international community can not differentiate between what's happening in France and what's happening here. Secondly, let the truth be told. Do you know there is a video going around of an American professor? I don't know the audience he was addressing, who said, let us face facts. The industrialized world is happy to keep Africa underdeveloped, keep Africa as hewers of wood and carriers of water, just producing natural goods for export to the developed countries, and that it is a poor Africa that can sustain the prosperity of the developed countries, and that all the developed countries are united in the economic policy of keeping Africa underdeveloped. And one of the processes that you use to keep a country underdeveloped is to promote disharmony within each country, so that they are never focused on policies of economic development. So don't for one moment think that the developed countries of the world are unhappy about what is going on in Nigeria. They like the disharmony, they like the disorder, as long as it does not affect export of crude oil or gas or gold or whatever mineral resources that their economic depends on. So they're not, I have said, I've been preaching this from the time up to my study from 1970, that no European or American country wants the evolution of a black power in Africa. And as Mandela said his own disappointment with Nigeria was that Nigerians didn't realize that the prosperity and the status and gravitas of the black race depends on Nigeria sorting itself out and Nigeria becoming a black power in the world. That when Nigeria sorts itself out, the black race will sort itself out. Mandela said it. You think that American scholars, European scholars, and now Chinese scholars don't realize that? and don't think it is in their interest that this black power will not evolve. So they're happy to have things just simmer on as they go.
Prof, thank you very much for your insight on the issues, the burning issues that are happening. I'm sure that there will be lots more to say on this particular topic. We've run out of time tonight. It's gone so quickly. Thank you for your insights. To our viewers, thank you for staying with us. Thank you for those of you who are waiting for the program to start. Thank you so much. And we'll look forward to seeing you again next week. And for those who submitted questions about the different issues which we were not able to get to today because of these burning issues, thank you. We will address some of these international issues again next week when we come to the program. And there's a final announcement next week as well for our different viewers at the studio here. We're based in the United Kingdom. Our time changes next week. So we go back to our time, and therefore for those who are in the West Africa area, we'll be broadcasting this at the West Africa time. Is what we're going to be broadcasting this at next week. We will put out the announcements as we usually do, and we will have the local times there. So it will not be 7 o'clock as it normally has been for you. It would be 1 hour ahead for you. But thank you so much for joining us and for staying through, even though we had to delay the program this evening. Prof, I don't know if you have any parting words for our viewers.
Well, I'm looking forward to getting back to discussing international issues. I hope there will be no tragedy that will bring the program back to focusing solely on developments in Nigeria. I'm more comfortable discussing international issues. But I thank you, as the moderator has said, for being patient with us. And well, I hope it's not going to be inconvenient that we will be broadcasting from 8 p.m. in West Africa as from next week. So do, if you've really benefited from being part of this program, do adjust yourself to be with us. I thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you one more time, and we'll see you next week.